Good afternoon. I'm Aisha Nicolai, Executive Director of the West of Melbourne Economic Development Alliance, or WoMEDA. I'm delighted to welcome you today to the launch of the Strategies for Skills and Jobs in Melbourne's West report. Let's begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the ancestors, elders and families of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung of the Kulin, who are the traditional owners and custodians of university land. As we share our knowledge practices within the university, may we pay respect to the deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community and their ownership of country. We acknowledge that the land on which we meet is a place of age-old ceremony, of celebration, initiation and renewal, and that the Kulin people's living culture has a unique role in the life of this region. VU is committed to building better relationships and fostering greater understanding between the wider Australian community and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. WoMEDA is pleased to be a partner in the Skills and Jobs for Melbourne's West project. This report has been prepared by the Mitchell Institute, Centre of International Research on Education Systems, or CIRES, at VU. As you'll shortly see, the report brings together a large amount of research and analysis, creating a highly informative and relevant report for today and our future. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Gail Tierney MP. Minister Tierney is the Minister for Training and Skills, Minister for Higher Education and Minister for Agriculture. She is also the State Member for Western Victoria. As the Member for Western Victoria, she is dedicated to the quality provision of health, education, infrastructure and community services. She understands the unique qualities of this region and is committed to enhancing employment opportunities, collaborating with industry and ensuring government has a regional focus. Her policy priorities are the provision of excellence in education, training and skills, regional infrastructure, employment, economic growth and sustainability, gender equality, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. A constant is the importance she has placed on education, which is integral to thriving communities and economies. She's passionate about equality and creating opportunities for all members of society. She's focused on building opportunities for women and culturally and linguistically diverse Victorians. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Aisha, and good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here at VU and to actually be meeting with you face to face, which, as you know, we haven't been able to do all that much of in recent times. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet here today, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my deepest respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. I also would, of course, like to acknowledge Adam Shoemaker, our Vice-Chancellor and President here at VU, Professor Peter Dawkins, the Chair of West of Melbourne Economic Development Alliance and former Vice-Chancellor. And as Adam said, when you have a former Vice-Chancellor who lives in the region, you've got a Vice-Chancellor for life. So it's great to see Peter and his team continue the great work that he has undertaken in the West for a very long time. So it is great to actually be here to formally launch Strategies for Skills and Jobs in the West report. And as you probably might have guessed, I particularly am interested in making sure that we have got a training and skills and higher education system that is a lot more cohesive and a lot more connected than what we've seen in the past. We've still got a bit to do, but there is a lot more that we'll be able to see into the future. And I think the Jenny Macklin report has assisted us in many ways. And it's all about joining the dots between the skills that we acquire, whether that be in the VET program or in higher education or indeed in adult education, and making sure that whatever we're doing is actually relevant. It's of high quality and connected to jobs. And I think that wasn't the case for some time. And we've certainly reinserted the big V of vocation back into education and training, because we do want to have pathways for a whole range of people, but particularly those that haven't had access in the past or are particularly disadvantaged, to have the opportunity to go to TAFE, to go to university, and to get the qualifications that they need to start a career, not just a job, a career, and a pathway that will be able to provide them all sorts of opportunities. And in terms of the state government, we are wanting people to basically go to their local institution, their VU, and stay in the region, get the job that is only around the corner, not have to go to the other side of Melbourne or indeed into the CBD. We want to build a fabric that's called the West and build that capacity and capability, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. And we have an amazing example of it just over the road in terms of the hospital. And when we knew that that was at the contemplated stage, we inserted ourselves in terms of the skills and training portfolio. We said that we wanted, given the proximity of VU to the construction site, we wanted to ensure that we could use it as a TAFE demonstration project, that vocational education and training students would be given the opportunity to work on site. And that's why we've also done it at Warrnambool, where the new Learn Library Hub has a banner right around it that's saying Southwest TAFE students are building this library. And it's also, of course, about making sure that we have got real life, real experiences on the job, training and work placements for students, whether they be apprentices or other categories in the construction area. But not only that, we wanted it to be connected to allied health and nursing. And of course, VU has stepped up, and we know that we will have work placements and we will have a whole new generation of people in the West connected not just with VU, but to the Footscray Hospital as well. So this is really exciting stuff, because we're no longer just joining the dots and talking about it, we're actually doing it. And so the report that you have done, which was financially assisted through the state government's Higher Education Investment Fund, this report is one, timely, two, it's highly relevant, and it is a complementary piece of what we're actually doing across the state. And the Macklin report called for us to set up an entity, a new separate entity, which we've done. It's called the Victorian Skills Authority, the VSA. That's been up and running since July last year, and it shifts into its new premises fairly soon. But I can tell you that the final draft has now been ticked off of the Victorian Skills Plan. And again, it's very consistent with what you've been able to do here in terms of this report. It's absolutely a microcosm of the overall arching template that the state government has been working on for some time. In terms of giving you a hint about where to next, and we do need to do provision planning and a whole range of other things and funding models, etc., etc. One of the other things that is very key to me that clearly shines through in this report too is that connection with industry, serious engagement with industry. And I think I could be quoted as saying a couple of times, even in the last couple of days, of saying my dream is to actually have teachers, curriculum writers and industry understanding that they have a common objective, and that is to get highly skilled kids into the workforce. And what do they need to do to get that done without cutting quality or indeed cutting costs or cutting people's real life and work life experiences. And I would like them to be able to actually throw away the key and that they don't come out until they've worked out not just the policy settings, but the implementation plans that apply to that industry or that occupation, and to fight off everyone who is trying to take advantage of a situation where we're trying to come through recovery and are just trying to drive flexibility to a point where it really isn't underpinning the strong foundations that we need. It is great that at the moment on the political agenda at the state and the national level now, that skills is definitely right up there. And of course, the connection for jobs as well. And we have the Jobs and Skills Summit around the corner. But what I seriously would like to encourage is that the talk about industry collaboration actually becomes the action of it, and that industry in particular doesn't sit on the edge and cry certain things, that they actually own their responsibility. And indeed, I would suggest that they need to make some real contributions as well, not just rely on what we are able to offer. But public provision is very much part and parcel of the state government's agenda, and we will continue to make sure that VET in particular is a cornerstone of not just our legacy, but is absolutely ingrained in future generations, not just now, but into the future. So what I can say to you today is, well done. This is absolutely great. As I said, it does complement a lot of the work that we are doing, but this is the granular work that needs to be done in our regions and in our communities, where we get our local principals and our industry leaders around the table and we call each other out on what we can bring to the table and act upon. You've been able to do that so far. I can't wait to see the next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I would like to now introduce Professor Adam Shoemaker, Vice-Chancellor of Victoria University.
Thank you. Gosh, can I say, Minister, it's not only a wonderful moment to have you here, but it's one of those moments when it's a bit like someone's completed a PhD and it's just been examined and you've just said, yes, it's passed. So great. Thank you so much for that assertion. But also, can I join you in recognizing voice not only to Parliament, but also the idea this week, in fact, was International Day of World Indigenous Peoples, just 2 days ago. And something I hadn't realized, but I was reminded of, was we're really talking about a major world force and we're playing it out here in Victoria. So 560 million First Nations people in the world today, 6% of the world population in 60 different countries, and legislatively, Victoria is leading the way in terms of its actions right now. So something to be terrifically proud of. And we really also want to play a role with government and with you in seeing that happen. And it will create, we believe, jobs and skills too, in new ways. So thank you for that reminder at the beginning. So we call it Victoria University. We could say Voice University. We're really interested in that aspect as well, but also vocational university and very serious about research university. So those things all come together in what we're discussing here today. And I think, to me, I really love the fact I grew up in a country which has a very strong commitment to public purpose education. There's very little private education in Canada, in fact. And here, I felt very much at home. You know, this idea of taxpayer endowed public purpose institutions that do great things, but only with partners and only with government in an alignment. And so I just wanted to say to you, I could not agree more. We need to do it seriously. And another area where I agree completely on behalf of our University Council is we've endorsed an idea of having industry at the core, but ethical aligned industry at the core of each campus. And we're going so far as to say, under this flipped campus model, unless there is such, it isn't a campus of the future. It isn't a campus of the future. So the redefinition of what we've had here in terms of the future of the Footscray precinct, you've nailed it, absolutely. It will be one amazing thing. So, you know, we have here with us Russell Harrison and others from Western Health. Wherever they are, we want to be too. So thank you for that. But there's another example I can give you, even in Sunshine, which is a marvelously important area and will be connected to the airport in the future, as you know, with rapid transport. So we've been able to just recently agree with Ambulance Victoria to situate its training headquarters for the whole west of Melbourne on that campus, to actually take over what used to be a conference center, which hasn't been used at all for the last 3 years. You can understand why, but we also think changing patterns of use, it's much better. And therefore, we'll be not only doing the A to Z of skills education with different diplomas in paramedicine and degrees, but also the real life ambulance service being there and dispatching it and trying to attract those and attack those issues of OOO, ambulance ramping, all those kinds of things which are really out there in society now. So talk about practical applications. It's exactly in league with this kind of report. So that's my absolute pleasure then to say that these are strategies. When we say strategies, we don't mean just things which we talk about which could win a game or win something on a weekend, but things which we can apply in a world that we're living in that desperately need them. And real strategies, as you've seen and we talked about earlier, for skills and jobs which last. And don't forget, when this hospital here opens, it will be for the first time the A to Z of skills on this campus too. It will then become a dual sector campus, just like the hospital becomes a dual sector hospital. Russell, I'm sure you've embraced that concept as well. So can I say to everyone online who's watching, but more importantly to those in the community, from Greater Western Water to all of our partners, we are here to be part of an alliance to do these things as public purpose, taxpayer endowed institutions, and proudly so. Minister, thank you for launching this. And we look forward to much more great work being done, what we call policy central, becoming legislation and becoming action for taxpayers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. I now introduce Professor Peter Dawkins, Chair of WoMEDA, West of Melbourne Economic Development Alliance.
Well, thank you very much, Aisha, and it's a great pleasure as Chair of WoMEDA, the West of Melbourne Economic Development Alliance, to follow Minister Tierney and Vice Chancellor Adam Shoemaker talking so enthusiastically about partnerships, collaboration, university industry collaboration, TAFE industry collaboration. They're both very passionate about this topic, and this is a major theme of the report that's being launched today. In common with the Minister and with the Vice Chancellor, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And say that the West of Melbourne Economic Development Alliance is all about these kind of partnerships. And I'm the chair, Aisha's the executive director, and we are an alliance of the major anchor institutions of the West of Melbourne, including Victoria University, Western Health, Greater Western Water, and the Western Bulldogs, local government across the region, and local business. And we have a proud record since our establishment in 2016 of advocating for the importance of investment in the West of Melbourne to grow jobs because of the massive growth of population. The region has outgrown the growth in jobs, and this creates risks for our population of excessive commuting out of the region and pockets of relatively high unemployment, especially young people transitioning from education to work. And in 2017, WoMEDA produced an economic development strategy for the region with a particular focus on the importance of developing job clusters in key precincts such as Footscray, Sunshine and Werribee, with Melton, another increasingly important focus, to promote the kind of industry, university, TAFE collaboration, the flip campuses, the Vice Chancellor now talks about it being a key aspect of these clusters. And we're very excited by the developments that have happened since that time and very optimistic about the continuation of them in the future. But of course, the last 2 or 3 years has been quite challenging because of the impact of COVID. And it hit, of course, in 2020, and it hit the West of Melbourne harder than just about any region in Australia, with a higher incidence of COVID in its early waves and a big impact on our businesses and our workforces. And so we were delighted, therefore, that the state government, through its Victorian Higher Education Investment Fund, funded this important research at Victoria University on the future of jobs in the West of Melbourne and on the skill needs of industry in the region. Of course, after the lockdown periods and the brief COVID recession, the Australian economy recovered and employment and vacancies grew and unemployment reduced. But of course, international supply shocks caused by the impact of COVID on supply chains and labour shortages in general and skill shortages in particular became an important challenge across the Australian economy, and this included challenges for businesses in the west of Melbourne, which was another reason why this research was very timely. So the report, which you will shortly hear more about from those who led and conducted the research, and it's been my pleasure to chair the reference group to bring industry and government together to discuss the research, addresses the paradox that businesses in the West are struggling to find people they need while skilled people are commuting out of the region for work. And this is a comprehensive study combining economic modelling with a survey of local businesses, and the report sets out strategies that were co-designed with industry and government. We believe that it should stimulate a major discussion of important policy settings for the future economic prosperity and social well-being of our region. And I commend the report to you all, and thanks again to the Victorian Government for funding it and to Victoria University for conducting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to now introduce Andrew Wade and Lizzie Knight from the Centre of International Research on Education Systems, Victoria University, and Janine Dixon, Centre of Policy Studies at Victoria University.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you everyone for coming along today, particularly the Minister, the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dawkins. I'm being the project lead for this project, Skills and Jobs for Melbourne's West, which we've been running over the last 15 months. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to try and summarise with Lizzie and Janine what we've done. And there's a report that you'll be able to be sending out electronically to everyone who's attended virtually, and hard copies for those here today physically. So there's a fair bit to go through, but we'll try and summarise it very quickly. So there are several phases to the project, two major phases. Phase one, which occurred between April and December of last year, culminating in our first Pillar 1 report, we call it, the Skills Needs in the West report, included a survey of employers, but we're very appreciative to the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions for sending it out to their employer database. Undertook numerous policy-focused interviews with a range of stakeholders, introduced the small grants program within VU, where we awarded grants to a range of researchers across the university. And a key part of it was also economic modelling undertaken by, led by Janine in COPS, who should be talking about that briefly as well. Phase 2, which culminated in the report we're launching today, ran from January to July of this year. Include the Pillar 2 report strategy and skills for jobs in Melbourne's West. And that included focus groups led by Lizzie Knight, an economic development roundtable, which was attended by a range of interested parties, both economists and industry experts, and also looking at reports from the small grant recipients that we awarded the grants to. And finally developed a framework, bringing together the range of strategies and enablers to ultimately generate jobs, skills to meeting the needs of industry in the West going forward. So I'll hand over to Janine, who'll talk about the economic modelling.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll try and be brief. I'm the economic modeller, and I've been known to carry on about it for hours. So I'll start with a brief overview of employment in the West, or in fact, I'll start with a brief overview of the West in general. So home out here to almost 900,000 people, expected to pass 1 million people by 2027. It's the fastest growing region in Victoria and one of the fastest growing in Australia. There's 433,000 workers live in Melbourne's West. So that's about 1 in 8 of Victoria's workforce call the West of Melbourne home. Now, what do these workers do? Well, 50% of the jobs of the workers of Melbourne's West are in just 5 industries: health, retail, logistics, construction, and manufacturing. That's not quite typical of Australia. There's a higher proportion of people in manufacturing and in logistics in particular, and probably a lower proportion in professional services. If you look at the colours on that chart, maybe a little difficult to see, but the light blue indicates the people who actually work in Melbourne's West. Right, so the full bar is people who live in Melbourne's West, but the light blue is people who actually just work in Melbourne's West as well. And so you can see that only about half of the jobs are actually done in Melbourne's West. It's just over half, 52%. So we have already a high degree of commuting out of the West. And you can also see there's a bit of an industry pattern there. So particularly, if I point there to professional services, you can see a lot of those jobs, that dark black colour, that's Melbourne inner, the city, also finance and public administration. So fewer opportunities for people who work in those industries exist locally here in the West. So yes, those are the high commuting industries, the ones where you see a lot of jobs going into the city. Now, modelling wouldn't be any fun unless we tried to look at what was going to happen into the future. So over the next 10 years, we expect there'll be about 134,000 more people employed by 2031, and that's on the back of very high population growth. The top 5 industries we expect for those new jobs will be health, again, construction, education, retail and professional services. So you see it's not quite the same as the top 5 currently. We see education coming in because we see a lot of population growth and a lot of children will be in this region, so the strong growth in education. And professional services is just a really strong growing industry all around the country, and the west of Melbourne is no exception. So you can already see some challenges there, particularly around professional services where there aren't the jobs here locally in the west. Forecast 134,000 more people to be employed in 10 years' time, but local jobs in the West, we forecast just 56,000 growth. So you can see the big deficit there. And that gives rise basically to our first challenge for the West, right? So we're starting here in 2021-22 with around 51% of people working in, 51% of Melbourne's West residents working here in Melbourne's West. And we expect with the strong growth in the population and the slightly weaker growth in local employment, that will fall to below 49% by 10 years' time. Now that deficit could be made up. So we could at least retain the current proportion of commuting if there was an extra 19,500 jobs here in the West. And so I'll leave it there with challenge 1 and pass over to Lizzie.
Thanks so much. Thank you, and thanks to Janine for talking. So I'm Dr. Elizabeth Knight. I'm the qualitative lead for this project, but I still didn't need my notes. I'm going to talk about 2 other challenges that we identified as part of this project, and particularly in the first sort of pillar, and then we went back and talked to the many employers we were able to survey. And we were so grateful for Business Victoria to sending out a survey, and we had over 700 engagements with employers and many interviews with policy people and from peak bodies and also from individuals who work in the West. We know many employers in Melbourne's West would like to employ locals, and as was highlighted in today's Herald Sun, this can be challenging. It was backed up in our findings in the survey. Some of the challenges highlighted by Stephen Loss of Australian Website Services were, despite his desire to employ locals, only 3 of his 10 staff from the West. So there's a lot of commuting there. Local skill shortages are reported as also placing an upward pressure on wages. So our survey showed that over 1/3 of employers in the West report lacking the skills they need today and didn't have the confidence that they would have them for the next 12 months. So we can see around 2/3 really had some anxiety about whether the skills pipeline was going to work for them. And those leaks in the skills pipeline were not just happening in initial training, but it was also happening all the way through in terms of continuing professional development, upskilling, micro-credentialing. So it's across the stages of recruitment and training. And the causes of these skills gaps are complex and they're not easily solved, and they really need to be solved by a deep engagement with and inside the industry. We also found our third challenge was that of the employers we talked to, there were fragile networks. There were some excellent, very strong relationships with VU and other providers, but there was generally a feeling that perhaps you had a link to with your OT placement, but you didn't have somebody who could talk to you about payroll, things like this. There was some general feeling of fragile links. And so we think in most cases, employers offer placements to students in different educational settings, but they perhaps were interested in more, and they were interested in really having a relationship with a training provider. So these were our three challenges, and we sort of were aware of them as ones we wanted to talk to you about. And we've had the real pleasure in the last 6 months of going back to the employers and going back to the peak bodies, and they have been able to, Business Victoria were again extremely helpful, resending, and people commented and suggested strategies. We also worked with our small grants and medium grants, and in their interim reports, they gave us innovative ideas that were already working in VU, which have contributed to the development of these strategies. So we have presented to you today a framework for an alternative future. We're taking a place-based approach, which has been developed and conceptualized to create a brighter alternative future. And as we talk about place-based, we very much place ourselves in the West, and we also have held central to us ideas about protecting country, which is in the VU strategic plan. We want to particularly thank our colleagues at the Aboriginal Unit Mundani Balak, who have been involved and led one of our grants, engaging with Aboriginal communities in the west of Melbourne. So that's been particularly important to us. And I want to talk through these 4 focal enablers, which you also, for those of us in the room, have seen highlighted. The first of these was the importance of creating a local ecosystem, a skill ecosystem, and then facilitating innovation, change and growth. And in terms of innovation in lots of different ways, and we can see that in the Footscray Hospital precinct, that there's an iterative movement between industry and employers. We also have institutions as a place for industry collaboration, and that we really have a space and time and feel our places are not just for academics, but are also for collaboration and partnerships that are authentic and deep. And finally, that's what we hope it leads to, an idea that there is authentic industry partnership. We think to activate that, to kickstart those enablers, we'll need to have strategies operating at different levels, macro levels, national perhaps, but governmental, then also meso level, of different levels of interaction between stakeholders, things like WoMEDA, things like different groups and different professional bodies, and also micro actions, processes and practices between organisations and businesses. And we think these interact with industry, jobs and skills to create this framework for an alternative future where everything works together, hopefully like a cog in a machine is our imagined future. Let me just give you one little slide of an example of how these work together. These are one macro, one meso and one micro strategy. The first one is policy signals around diverse skills, which is a macro level strategy. An example like paramedics at Sunshine, thinking how we can deal with something like that. Diversifying partnerships can work towards authentic industry engagement and creating local skills ecosystem. And I think of Louise Robinson's work in the transport area, particularly as something like this. Then finally, thinking about stock taking and broadcasting our successful outreach activities and the small grants that we've been able to do to look at the really innovative practice all across VU has been a great example of that. So that we're hoping that this project legacy is a starting point for continuing engagement, and Andrew will talk in more detail.
Thank you, Lizzie. So moving forward, one of the first things we mentioned, Janine mentioned before about the gap, the 19,500 jobs gap. So the notion being, it's not about creating 19,500 jobs out of nowhere in Sunshine. In effect, it's about over a period of time, jobs which otherwise would have been established in other parts of Victoria, particularly, instead growing in the West. And in this case, we have the notion, just a hypothetical example of it happening in Sunshine. The question then is, well, what jobs and what sectors and so forth? And building upon work that Peter referred to earlier done by WoMEDA, looking at, they had a report called Sunshine Tearing to be Great. And the work was led by Professor Rod Maddock, who is a fellow at VU. We identified several sectors where we think there's opportunities there. And Russell will speak about this shortly in terms of Western Health, but number one is definitely much the healthcare and social assistance sector. In Sunshine, which we know the airport rail link will be going through. There's also significant healthcare services available, Sunshine Hospital, and there's a private hospital there and other developments happening. So in that area, we're looking at around 8,500 jobs alone. We think there's opportunity for that increase to happen in healthcare and social assistance. Additionally, jobs in public administration and legal services. We know COVID has shown there's no need for all of the government departments to be so strongly focused in the CBD. The scope for them is spread out. And Sunshine, we think there's opportunity there, both in public administration and also expanding, for example, legal services out there as well, both through the court and other associated legal services. And another example is in professional, scientific and technical services as well. We think there's opportunities there to grow jobs there. And there's other opportunities we think in construction, manufacturing, retail, education and tourism. So there's 5 major infrastructure hubs around the Sunshine area that we think these can be targeted to be anchored to. The hospital, Sunshine Hospital, VU itself, Magistrates Court, the Sunshine Transport Hub, and finally the Western State significant industrial precinct. So each of those we think can provide the anchor to be able to generate and attract 19,500 jobs over the next 10 years. If that occurs, that decline that Janine presented in terms of the decline in local employment, percentage of people who would work locally, should be at least be able to maintain at 52% instead of dropping down to 49% over the next 10 years. In terms of the way forward, we think there's several opportunities to be able to progress this work going forward. And that's something that VU, our centre, will be looking to progress over the coming months. Number one is harnessing the West's growing population. As Janine talked about earlier, it's growing quite fast, especially within Victoria or compared to the rest of Australia as well. And that will only increase, we think, even more once immigration starts up again in a more rapid way following the, as we transition out of the COVID period. Once again, and as Lizzie spoke about, it's about progressing the enablers and the strategies that our report identified. There's a whole range of work that needs to occur by different levels of government, but that alone we think can progress, and that will require stakeholders collaborating, VU, government, industry, community groups. A whole lot of parties will need to be collaborating to work together. Governments working together. So in the west of Melbourne, we have 6 different local government areas, and each of them alone have their very strong focuses on their economic development. So if they can work together more so than they already are, collaborate with state and Commonwealth governments, we think there's great potential there. Networks across the West, and particularly that industry training, education training provision, that there's great opportunities to progressing, improving there. And finally, building capacity, ensuring that the strategies that we are developing here over time, there's less need to have active intervention from government, but rather it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle that can grow on its own steam. So that leads us to the end of my presentation here, and I'll hand over now to Ayesha for the next part.
Thank you, Andrew, Janine and Lizzie. It's now my pleasure to introduce Russell Harrison, CEO of Western Health. Russell has been CEO of Western Health since 2017 and has practical knowledge and first-hand experience in the struggle to align jobs and skills in Melbourne's West.
Thanks, Arisha, and thanks everyone. It feels a bit of a fraud standing up here as an industry partner, but I'll take it and run with it. And thanks to colleagues, the report is great, as other people have said, and I think it's well worth a read, and there's some really great practical strategies in there. As Aisha said, you know, we are probably now the biggest employer in the West with about 11,500 staff. And the great news is 68% of those staff live in the west of Melbourne. That's a pretty big and growing area, but we have a very diverse workforce, and we're thrilled that that continues to be the case. We do have a problem. We are growing at an almost exponential rate thanks to support from government for our business cases, and it's great to see sunshine up there because we've got another one coming. So hopefully that will continue to grow to help meet the population needs. But the workforce is a challenge. We work very closely with VU and other partners to create that workforce, but often it's overlooked that it's all clinical. We talk about nurses and doctors and allied health staff, and there's a whole pipeline and pathway for them, but we don't talk about the other professional services in healthcare now that we desperately need: IT professionals, HR, you know, accountants, etc. And that is a huge growing problem as we continue to increase the diversity of jobs in health. The technology now involved in healthcare is almost unrecognizable to even 5 years ago, and will continue to develop at that sort of pace. So we want to work equally in partnership with agencies to create those pathways for skilled individuals to come in and find a career in healthcare in non-clinical roles as well as the clinical roles. And we're forecasting, so I'll come and compare notes later, but we think Western Health by sort of 2030 will be double the size it is now, because we're building Footscray across the road, we're building Melton, we're building community hospitals, we've got mental health services coming. So a continued huge growth in opportunities across the board, and hopefully we can continue to increase the share of Westies coming to work for us, because that's one of the passionate things that we do, and having those pipelines in place is really important. And a practical example of that is captured in the document is working on curriculum development. The Minister said that earlier. We've invested with VU in looking at the curriculum for nurses, and that's been a huge benefit because we're now retaining about 70% of those that we're training, whereas about 3 years ago, it's about 35–40%. So a real dual in-depth look at what do we need, how do we do that, and how does that then benefit the healthcare pathway? And one thing I will leave you with is that Melton isn't that far away. So our next graduate intake across all of our professions are the future leaders that will run that hospital. And therefore we have to have continued lifelong learning for those staff to learn, to develop, to get those skills to run what are pretty large businesses in their own right in a hospital. And that needs training and it needs skill. And at the moment, we don't teach our clinicians how to manage things. We do that on the way, if they're lucky. But we're putting a lot of energy with our partners to how do we tailor that. So we're almost getting there, Minister, to get to that dream. It's not a million miles away, but we'll keep going. But a fabulous report. Thanks to all the colleagues involved in doing that, and the strategies in there are really helpful on the ground to turn great theory and great ideas into practical actions, which is the important bit. So thank you all.
Thank you, Russell. I'd like to now welcome Andrew Wade back to the lectern for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Aisha. I'd like to make thank you for everyone for being part of the launch today. An email will be sent tomorrow with links to the report. And for those of us who are here in person, you'll be able to get a hard copy. And for those who are online, you'll be able to request a hard copy to be sent to you as well. I'd like to make some thank yous for those who, for the event today, especially to my core research team, Lizzie Knight, Melissa Tam, Wan Guo, and also Janine Dixon from the Centre of Policy Studies. A further 20 VU researchers and other staff were involved in different parts of the project, the research as well, and I'm very appreciative for their work, and that some of it's still ongoing as we speak right now. So looking forward to that work coming out in the coming months. I'd like to thank our project managers, Michael Williams and Eleonora Gatto, members of our project reference group chaired by Peter Dawkins, our project advisors, Rod Maddock and Louise Robinson, and finally, VU Brand and Marketing helped create the very glossy report and the post. There are some posters on the wall over here, which you can't see on those online, but they're very impressive pieces of work as well. So I'd like to thank you all for coming today and have a great evening. Thank you.